Hello, gang. Tattooed Biker here with you. And tonight, I've got 5 compelling true reports and startling cryptid encounters to share with you. This episode runs the gamut with an unidentified flying cryptid, a knotted deer, a possible Bigfoot encounter, a lizard man, and even what the witness believes was a terrifying encounter with the legendary beast of Bray Road. You don't want to miss this one. So grab your boots and let's ride to cryptid country. Number 1. Hey biker, I recently watched your video about flying cryptids and I decided to contact you directly about an encounter that I had. My experience happened in eastern Washington in a town called Leavenworth on Seagull Creek Drive. I was on my daughter's great-grandparents' piece of land. They had a mountain behind their house and we had parked our van on the edge of the woods. There was a grassy field behind us and we put up the tent and unpacked the cooler and everything. And my boyfriend at the time, he had gotten up earlier, made himself a sandwich, and then went for a walk in the woods. As I was lying there, I dozed off, and then an incredible whooshing sound woke me. This is so hard to explain. A really loud whooshing sound. Like whoosh, whoosh. And then all of a sudden, my tent started collapsing from the velocity and the force of these wings that were so big. I'm inside the tent, keep in mind, so I don't actually see it, except for the huge shadow of it. The tent was made of thin plastic, and this creature was backlit by the floodlight nearby. Whatever it was, this thing was enormous. It must have had an 18 to 20 foot wingspan. I woke up to this and just completely freaked out. I crawled out from under the plastic, and this is the strange part. My boyfriend had put on the top of the cooler a loaf of bread, and whatever this thing was, with their talons, it had picked up the loaf of bread and was screaming as it flew away. It then dropped the loaf of bread about 20 yards from the tent. I mentioned this incident to my grandfather, who's a police officer. He said that there aren't any birds near the size that I described in that region. But he was quite dodgy, and he didn't tell me that I might have just imagined the size. He said that unexplained creatures had previously been reported in that same area, including those loud whooshing sounds that I heard have also been heard by others. Thanks for reading. Signed, Rachel. Number 2. Hello biker. I have watched several videos on your channel and have been amazed by some of the strange creatures described in them. I'm from Luce County, Michigan. I lived in a small town where there were still dirt roads and plenty of forested areas. Because of all this, I, like most Upper Peninsula residents, am extremely familiar with deer. No one wants to wreck a car from hitting one. So one night as I'm driving home, way back when, and going slower than usual because it's spring and I'm watching for deer to cross the road. And that's when I see one dash across in front of me. So I brake because, well, where there's one, there's probably 2, if not more. The thing is, I caught a glimpse of this animal, and it was deer-like in every single way. Antlers, a regular deer-shaped face, reflective eyes, short hair, and all that. But the thing was, it was running on 2 legs, and it was so damn tall. It also turned its head in my direction for a few seconds as it was walking. Now deer are pretty big, and I've been close to them, and they're often bigger than what people realize, but this thing would have been way above average by any estimation. I'm also well aware that deer can and do go on their hind legs, but running across the road that way would be very abnormal. And its motions, they were very fluid, like an athletic human would run. Not off balance, like you would assume a 4-legged creature to be, on only 2 legs. So the whole thing, it was very strange. Maybe nothing abnormal, or even paranormal, but it's still something that sticks out in my mind as a very very odd experience. Signed, Monty. Number 3. Dear Biker, I've told my family this story a few times, and I always get some weird looks, but it really stands out for me, so I'll share it with you. It is the only sighting that I've ever had, and I don't know if I'd call it an encounter, per se. Anyway, I was a teenager at the time, and was enjoying a late-season elk hunt in Washington State with my father. I don't recall the exact area, but it was in the foothills of the Cascades, just northwest of the Yakima area. This was in mid-November or so, with a minor skiff of snow on the ground, but not enough to completely cover it. My dad and I had set out from the truck in the early morning, and we followed a ridge line that was on one side of a natural bowl that had been logged a few years prior. The ridge line was still treed and fairly dense until you reached the edge of the ridge. We decided to make our way to the bottom of the bowl and then follow an old logging road that went from the bottom to the top and try to push any game out towards my brother-in-law, who had went around the other side of the bowl. It had probably taken us about 20 minutes to get from the top of the ridge to the bottom. Halfway back up the logging road, we stopped to take a break. It was pretty steep in places, and watched for game sign. As I turned to look towards the bottom of the bowl, I glanced up toward where we had previously been, and that's when I see a dark, humanoid shape moving at a speedy pace along the ridgeline where we had just come from. Now, it wasn't a hunter so far as I could tell. It had no hunter orange or any discernible pattern of clothing at all. And what was more impressive was the long gait of this creature as it rapidly moved along the edge of the trees. My younger mind told me that it had to be a cross-country skier because of the gait and speed that it was moving. But like I said, there wasn't near enough snow for a skier to be moving that quickly. The primary reason to believe it might be a skier was its really smooth locomotion. The head and shoulders didn't appear to rise and fall, as you might expect from a bipedal creature, especially when on the move like this one was. No, it didn't look like a human on the run at all, and it gave me this uneasy feeling as I watched it cover the space of nearly a quarter mile in what seemed like only seconds. It continued on down the ridge until it finally disappeared from view, entering the trees. I remember just sitting there in stunned silence before we resumed our climb. Now, at the time, I didn't mention it to my dad because I knew he would say that it was just another hunter, but even to this day, I still have very deep doubts about that possibility. I wish I had said something at the time, and I wish I had pointed it out. I guess I'll never really know, but in my gut, I know that it wasn't human. Signed, Anonymous. Number 4. Hey TB, at the time of this incident, in the summer of 2017, I lived in Woodstock, Illinois, a suburb northwest of Chicago, only about a half hour away from the Wisconsin border. This cryptid that I believed I encountered has been called different names since the late 1960s. It was known as the Bull Valley Monster on the Illinois side, and I recall my uncle speaking about it when I was about 12. And even then, he seemed nervous, even talking about it, but he never saw it. The general public probably knows it best as the Beast of Bray Road. At the time, I worked a night shift, so on my days off, I was a night owl. And that particular night, a friend had invited me over. It was nearly 11 o'clock at night. I crossed the highway and got on this bike trail near the train tracks. To the left of me was this large field, and on my right, train tracks and the highway. After I got to the point where some trees covered the field, I started to get this weird feeling. And then all of a sudden, I heard movement in the trees. I thought it was a deer perhaps, because It was moving the smaller trees as it came forward. My first instinct was to give it some room to pass until I hear this growl, and I thought, uh-oh, a badger. And then a second later it hit me that this was at least as large as a deer moving those tree branches. It couldn't be a badger. And that's when it growled about 10 times louder. Now, it was moving my way faster and breaking branches as it came. I immediately turned and ran back across the train track and onto the highway, not even looking to see if any cars were coming. Once I hit the other side of the street, I didn't stop running for about 50 feet. And that's when I turned my head and saw about 3 cars coming. I glanced across the road, and there I could see a crouching humanoid shape with a wolf's head profile. There was a hint of bright red eyes in the darkness. And this thing was at least 7 feet tall, hiding there between 2 train cars watching me. It seemed almost afraid to be seen. I ran, and I didn't stop running for about 3 blocks. I didn't stop until I reached this well-lit area where there was this cluster of factories and a closed auto store. But even then, I didn't feel safe until I reached the old downtown area where there was a 24-hour gas station and a few open bars. That's where I slowed my pace and I walked a block over to my friend's house. All the time, I was just trying to absorb what had just happened. It was a bipedal animal that had probably stalked me long before it charged. But I will say that I had sensed it. And that was the weirdest thing. The sense of uneasiness that preceded the experience. That and that loud, inhuman growl. Anyway, I got to my friend's house and he had his front door open. And he asked if I was all right because I was so pale. I just pushed past him and I grabbed 2 beers from the case we hadn't finished the night before, and I said, "Man, sit down. You're not going to believe this." And we spent the rest of the night just talking about my encounter. We were throwing out all these wild theories about what it could actually be and if it might be able to walk through dimensions. And maybe that's why there's no corpses of these things. The whole thing was truly terrifying. A life-changing experience that I'll carry with me for the rest of my days. Signed, Dennis. Number 5. Dear Biker, I wanted to share an encounter I had back in 1979, towards the end of August. My dad, Grandpa, my best friend and I, we were all at my family's hunting cabin. It had just turned dark and my dad and friend left to go get fishing bait because we had forgotten to pick some up earlier that day. After they were gone, Grandpa and I were just talking in the cabin living room when something on 2 legs comes walking up the porch steps. It was loud enough for my grandpa to hear. Even with his hearing aids, he could still hear it. And he says, "It looks like we have company." So I walked over to the door and I opened it, but there was nothing there. And we didn't hear anything leave the porch, which was kind of weird. I guess this creature was jumping over the porch rails. Grandpa says, "I know someone was there, scratching his head," when, again, we heard something coming back up the steps on the porch. And this time, it opened the screen door to get to the main door, and I grabbed my grandpa's .357 pistol and aimed it at the door while this thing is turning the knob. I shout out, "I'll shoot you through the door if you don't announce yourself." Strangely enough, it then let go of the door handle, and it was a matter of that door moving inches of me shooting through it. So I walked over to the door with the gun aimed at it to see what the heck was out there moving around. I pulled the door open, ready to fire, and once again, there's nothing there. But now I see the headlights of my dad and friend coming back with the bait. I shut the door and I turned to tell Grandpa that I saw nothing but my dad coming back. Grandpa starts freaking out, telling me that I've got to go out there and tell my dad that we have an intruder wandering around the property. So I open the door as they're pulling into the driveway, and I walk out into the darkness to tell them what's going on. They just start laughing at me like I was joking, but then I said, "Would Grandpa give me his .357 to come telling you a joke?" Grandpa tells me to tell my friend what happened, as he tells my dad in the kitchen. As I'm talking to my friend, sure enough, here comes the thing up the steps again. My friend grabbed the 357 and ran out the door, and I followed with a Bowie knife and my grandpa's military flashlight from his time in the Korean War. I get outside and I manage to shine the light on this thing, and I swear this thing was out there. This thing was about 6 feet tall, with a lean, muscular physique of about 180 to 200 pounds, with absolutely no body hair. It looked almost like a lizard-human hybrid. It was grayish-blue in color, and covered in what looked like shiny scales, and its head was sort of, well, snake-shaped. My friend fired a shot over its head, and it hissed at us, and then bolted. We tried to chase it, just stopping at the property line, and gave up. This thing ran so incredibly fast in the dark down a mountainside towards the river. It ran faster than any animal that I've ever seen in my life. There was just no possible way we could keep pace with it. My friend and I then sat up all night, and we never seen or heard anything else for the rest of our trip. I'm the only one left alive who was there that night. My dad, grandpa, and friend have all since passed since that incident. I thought I would share this since, well, I believe it needs to be shared, and people need to know what's really out there. And I'm the last one that's still around. I was 18 years old when this happened. And please keep details like my name and location confidential, please. Signed, Anonymous.
And there it is, gang. All the real cryptid encounters and reports that I've got for you tonight. So, what were these creatures? Are these just simply cases of misidentification? Or is this world a lot more dangerous and mysterious than we're taught to believe? Don't forget to leave your thoughts and theories in the comments down below, but please, keep it respectful to the witnesses. And if you have a strange experience or unexplained encounter that you'd like to share, just send it to the email address in the description, and well, your story may just wind up in a future video. Anyways, thanks so much for riding with me tonight. I really appreciate you. And until next time, stay curious, stay vigilant, stay safe, and I'll be seeing you on down the road a ways. Biker out.